I was 17 at the time, and it was the start of a chilly summer in Dublin, so I was on a break from college with no job lined up. Most of my time was spent inside my small flat in Temple Bar, playing console games, browsing Reddit, watching documentaries on the BBC iPlayer, or just relaxing. At the time, my parents were away on a business trip to Belfast for a few days, leaving me home alone. This was a common occurrence and never a big deal. Sometimes I'd have friends over for tea, but that night I was just enjoying the time to myself. I was watching reruns of one of my favorite shows on Channel 4, while scrolling through my Instagram feed on my phone. It was already quite late. I don't know the exact time, but I think it was probably 11 p.m. or midnight when there was a knock on the front door of the flat. I turned off the television and went to see who it was. I almost didn't register how late it was, but thankfully it occurred to me before I would have carelessly opened the door. I looked through the peephole and saw two men wearing similar jackets just waiting for me to answer. I stood there and thought for a moment whether to let them know I was home by asking what they wanted. I ultimately stayed quiet and just watched, waiting for them to leave. But a few seconds later they called out, "Hello, we're here to speak with Mr. and Mrs. O'Connell." They were referring to my parents, though I've changed the names for privacy. I was confused. I remained silent. Realizing it was far too late for any kind of visit, even an important one, after a minute, the men looked at each other, said something quietly, and then walked off the porch. The exterior light was off, so I couldn't see where they went, but I never saw any car headlights or a taxi show up. This made me wonder if they had walked here, which would only make things stranger. I went back to the TV but left it paused for a bit so I could listen to see if they came back. It only took a few minutes until I heard a pair of footsteps outside the flat. They came up onto the porch, but instead of knocking like they did before, they started walking to the side of the building. I got up and ran to the back window just as they reached the backyard. I saw them open the gate and let themselves in. I hid from the window so I wouldn't be seen, but I could hear them coming up to the back door. They started talking and then began fiddling with the door. I took this chance to grab my phone and hide inside a small utility closet. I called the Garda Síochána, the Irish police, and explained the possible break-in that was in progress. Less than a minute later, a loud pop vibrated through the flat and the back door slid open. Their footsteps moved through the house and went straight for the stairs leading to the bedrooms. A door opened. They went in. Then they closed it behind them. After that, however, there were no more sounds. I waited in terrifying, slow silence for 10 minutes before the police arrived at the flat. When they did, there were some quick footsteps upstairs, and then the two men started arguing. Several officers entered through the back door and ran upstairs, while another came to the utility closet and helped me out. Outside, the men didn't resist, but they also didn't talk. Word about why they were there never came, even after weeks passed. It was pretty clear they weren't just robbing the place, but the only charge they could press was breaking and entering. Still, I was terrified because they seemed to be looking for my parents, and it felt like they were going to wait upstairs until they returned from their trip. I think back, wondering if I should have revealed myself and if that would have stopped the break-in, but something about their behavior tells me they would have broken in anyway and would have done whatever they wanted to me. I reside in a secluded cottage in the Scottish Highlands. The main reason I chose this place is that owning a large plot of land isn't an impossible task, unlike in many other regions. My cottage is small, but it's perfectly comfortable for me to live in alone. This event took place 3 years ago, in the late autumn of 2022. At that time, a relentless cold rain had been falling for weeks, making the surrounding ground muddy and bleak. That night was a Friday, and I had just finished my work for the week. I was spending the evening relaxing, watching a series on my tablet. Around 8 p.m., when it was already completely dark, I heard an unexpected knock on my front door. The sound was faint, nearly drowned out by the roar of the rain hitting the roof. It was highly unusual for anyone to come to my property, which is so remote, without prior notice. When I opened the door, my surprise grew. There stood a strange man, soaking wet, who appeared to be in his early 30s. "How can I help you?" I asked. He explained that he had been hiking in the surrounding hills and that his tent had been destroyed by the storm. He needed a place to shelter for the night. His story was plausible enough, considering my cottage is the only building within. at least a 15-kilometer radius in the middle of this pine forest. Although I felt sorry for him, my instincts warned me of the danger of letting a stranger into my house. I offered him my phone to contact the National Park Rangers or a nearby inn, but he refused. After I firmly told him he couldn't stay here, the man just nodded, turned around, and walked away. I watched him walk down the muddy path before taking a sharp turn and disappearing into the dark woods. Strangely, I didn't think much of it and went back to my show. It must have been at least 2 hours later, deep into the night, when I noticed a reddish-orange glow coming from the window overlooking my backyard. I got up and pulled back the curtains. Through the rain and thick fog, I saw a makeshift campfire flickering under a large tree. Next to it, a figure was standing, holding something long. I couldn't tell if he was facing my cottage or the woods. After watching for a moment, I closed the curtains, grabbed my phone, and called the police to report the situation. I knew it would take the police at least an hour to arrive. After hanging up, I peeked through the window again. The fire was still burning, but the figure was gone. Suddenly, I heard footsteps on the wet ground getting closer. I rushed to another window and saw the man walk past the side of the cottage with an old double-barreled shotgun in his hands. My heart pounded as he turned the corner towards my front door. He banged on the door several times hard, then it went silent. I quickly grabbed my revolver from a cabinet in the hallway and hid behind a wall, trying to process what was happening. He pounded on the door again, this time with the butt of his shotgun nearly splintering the wooden panel. I knew then it was a life-or-death situation. Without a second thought, I fired a shot towards the doorframe. The gunshot was deafening, echoing through the cottage. When my hearing returned, all I could hear was the sound of the rain. There was no more banging, no footsteps, no shouting. After gathering my courage for 5 minutes, I looked through the peephole. The front porch was empty. In the yard, footprints were clearly visible. Leading hastily away from the cottage, he must have fled right after the shot. When the police arrived, they conducted a thorough search and found something odd near the campfire site. A worn military canvas bag that looked like it had just been dug up from the ground. According to the police, the bag contained burglary tools, rope, and duct tape. It was most likely a pre-staged kit, buried to be used later. This meant that whoever attacked me that night had planned it and had been on my property at least once before. Now, 3 years have passed. I still live in the same cottage, and the man's identity and whereabouts remain a mystery. Every day, I live with the fear that he might come back. In the autumn of 2003, when I was 19 years old, I lived with just my mother in a simple wooden house on the outskirts of a small town in Minnesota. As a college student on a semester break, the days felt slow. My mother worked the night shift at a packaging plant, which meant I was home alone almost every night from 7 p.m. until dawn. That particular night was an ordinary one. The air was cold, and the wind rustled through the pine trees in the backyard. Around 7:30 p.m., I waved as my mother's old car disappeared down the road. Then I spent the next few hours working on a college paper and listening to music. Since I had no classes the next day, I allowed myself to stay up a little later than usual. Around 11:30 p.m., I turned off all the lights downstairs, locked the door, and went up to my room. I still read a novel for about another hour before finally drifting off to sleep. I was awakened by the soft creak of the front door closing. In a groggy state, I glanced at the digital clock beside my bed, which read 3:15 a.m. I assumed my mom had just gotten home early. I rolled over, trying to fall back asleep, but then I heard footsteps downstairs. The sound was strange, not like my mother's hurried steps. Usually, my mom came straight upstairs to rest, but these footsteps sounded slow, methodical, and aimless. For the next 2 or 3 minutes, the sound continued, as if someone was walking a lap through each room, from the living room to the dining room, pausing briefly before continuing. A sense of nervousness began to creep over me. This felt wrong. That might not be my mom. With my heart pounding, I got up and switched on the lamp on my desk. Almost instantly, the footsteps downstairs stopped completely. The sudden silence felt far more terrifying. I held my breath and listened from behind my bedroom door, but there was no sound at all. Very carefully, I opened the door and peered into the hallway. I should have been able to see light from downstairs, but the entire house was pitch black. Whoever was down there was moving in total darkness. I crept to the top of the stairs, making sure not to make a sound. I knelt and peered through the gaps in the staircase railing to see the living room. No one was there, even in the dark. I could see that my father's antique turntable was still in its place. My logic told me that if it were a burglar, that valuable item would have been taken. The thought calmed me slightly. Maybe I had just misheard something. "Mom, are you home?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer. The house remained silent. With what little courage I had left, I went down the stairs and walked toward the kitchen. That's when I saw them, wet, muddy boot prints on the ceramic floor. When I lifted my head, my eyes locked onto a figure across the room. A man was sitting rigidly in one of the dining table chairs, wearing a dark ski mask that covered his entire face. His clothes were all black, blending into the shadows. He just stared straight at me, not moving, not making a sound. My breath caught in my throat. Without thinking, I turned and sprinted back upstairs, slamming my bedroom door and locking it. My hands were shaking violently as I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. The operator on the other end tried to calm me while telling me that the police were on their way. But a minute later, I heard the floorboards below me creak. He began to climb the stairs, slowly, one by one. I whispered frantically to the operator, telling her what was happening. Just as the footsteps reached the top of the stairs, I heard the front door of the house open, and then the footsteps faded away outside. Not 30 seconds later, car headlights swept across my bedroom window. My mom was home. I ran outside to meet her, frantically telling her everything that had happened. When the police arrived, they combed through the entire house and yard, but found no sign of anyone. The man had vanished. However, one horrifying conclusion seared itself into my mind. The man wasn't there to rob us. He also didn't seem interested in hurting me. He had entered the house just minutes before my mother's routine arrival time. He was waiting for her. The thought of what might have happened if I hadn't gone downstairs, or if my mom had come home 1 minute earlier and walked into the house, unaware of the person waiting for her at the dining table, continues to haunt me to this day.